Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Fantasy Fullback Dive, brought to you by the good people at the Roto Street Journal, paving your way to fantasy glory, acting as your lead blocker to fantasy excellence, making all your football-related fantasies come true. I'm your host, Nat the Truth Jones. With me, as always, the Wolf of Roto Street himself, and with me, not that frequently, but who I'm thrilled to have in the building, or not in the building, but at least on the screen, our guy Jackson, who is, about as much of an auction expert guy as you're going to come across. He's written some awesome stuff for the site. He's got this amazing auction tool that we actually used last year. We had a great auction preview show last year. And this is actually very timely for me. I've got an auction coming up in a little less than 2 hours. So I'm going to be primed and ready to go with the help of some guys that, a little smarter than me on this stuff. And I'm going to get to pick their brains a little bit. I'm going to go and destroy the rubes that I'm going to be drafting against. Wolf, how you doing? It's great to see you. And you got anything to say before we get into this?
There's just nothing I like more than auction drafting. It's the funnest, best way to do it. I mean, that kind of kicks us right into that first question.
Yeah, so that's question one. Why an auction, Wolf?
Why an auction? And if you're watching this, you're probably like, I'm already doing an auction. I don't want to see this. So I will keep it short, simple. You guys add anything on. One, just more flexibility. You can get your guys. You're not locked into, I can't get CMC because I got a 10 spot. You can build however you want. And that's what I love about how many unique builds you see. You kind of start to see owner has a unique approach to it. So I love that every team is different than what you typically see, that you can go out and get your guys. Plus, it's just so much damn fun. There's so much action. Every second you're making a decision. There's heat. There's battles and bidding wars, and you can't rest at all. And I love that. If I'm drafting, I want to be engaged. I don't want to make a pick and then have to wait 25 and I just sit there and kind of fall asleep and drink, and then suddenly I'm just like, you got to be engaged the entire time. So those are all the best reasons, in my opinion. Do you guys have any others that you'd add to why an auction?
I mean, most of what I would say would be repeating or piggybacking on what you said. This would relate to the more action. I mean, there's also just the fun aspect of there's guys that can just go on tilt, and that is fantastic. In a snake draft, no one's going to go on tilt like they do in an auction. I love it when you see a guy, maybe there's been 10 overall picks and you look at the money and there's like someone with like $12 left or something like that. And, it's fantastic. Just nothing is entertaining. Almost the whole fantasy season after that is a little bit of a letdown after a good auction. And I love a good fantasy season. So I can't wait. I'll never go back to snake draft.
Yeah, I would say too, if you like winning your league, then auction is going to give you a way better chance to win if you're playing against people like in a home league who probably don't take it as seriously, especially if you use this tool and you have like correct prices on everyone and everyone else is kind of just drafting off the standard values on the website. Like you can really get way better teams than you ever could in Snake.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue, Jackson. We're here to win your league, so let's talk about how to absolutely dominate your auction draft. If you're here with us, that thumbs up button does really greatly get us out there. Please do get any questions in, whether you're in auction leagues or not. I think this would be a great video for you to watch so you can learn about how much goes into this and how much of an edge you can gain. So try to push your leagues to it. But if you are with us, please do consider that thumbs up button. It would mean the world. Let's dive in, though. Step one to dominating an auction draft, to gaining that edge on your league, is definitely studying the market, creating some strong player prices. So as you can see, if you're watching this, if you're listening to the pod, maybe pull up a YouTube here when you get a chance and check out what we have, because there are some great tools on our website, rotostreetjournal.com. The man, myth, legend, Jackson Bear, as we introduced, is the author of all this stuff, the creator of some great stuff for you to gain your edge. 4-part series, how to dominate your auction. We're going to boil it down into 3 steps just for the sake of time tonight. But as you can see here, part 1, dominating by setting those player prices, then getting your game plan plus audibles ready. That's going to be step 2 we dive into. And then just some in-draft strategy and tips for maximizing it once you're in the game, in the flow. How do you dominate? But of course, pricing, how much you're paying for players is the ultimate test of an auction draft. And many of your league mates will just be looking at the Fantasy Pros, the Yahoo, wherever they're playing from, and going off that list. But Jackson, you've got a great tool that I'm going to just kind of pull in here. And I'd love for you to explain how this works, because you can really customize to your league, to your settings, to so much that I think it's just the best tool out there. So why don't you explain kind of how this works?
So yeah, just to start off, like I didn't build this base tool. It was taken from a Reddit user, and I did get his consent to write these articles and like tweak the tool just a little bit. But so the first thing you want to do is you want to come over to the starter info tab and then basically just put in whatever your league settings are. So like if you're playing in a 1 QB league, you would put 1 quarterback and then just match all of this part right here to exactly what your league settings are. Like some people might not play with the kicker or defense. So you could just put 0 in for kicker, hit enter, 0 in for defense, hit enter, and then it's going to change based on your specific league settings. And like those positions don't really have that big of an effect, but you could start like 7 wide receivers or something, and then that's going to obviously drastically change the budgets. So probably the most important thing about any league, but specifically an auction, is you have to match your league settings with the prices that you're going to pay for everyone, because it's going to be different depending on league settings. And then over here you just have the scoring for every position. So you just want to put all that into. So like if you're having like a 6 versus 4 passing touchdowns for quarterbacks, or like full PPR, half PPR, anything like that, like you just want to make sure these cells over here are matching your league settings.
I think that's such a great point too, because some of the most common things you'd see, like a 2 receiver league versus a 3 receiver league, PPR versus half PPR, or if you're a dinosaur still in standard league, probably not auction drafting, but just in case, toss that out there. That makes such a big impact. But as we were kind of joking about before we even got live, that doesn't really get factored at all into Yahoo, what they put out there. It's nothing customized about 2 receivers versus 3 receivers, PPR versus half. They just pretty much dump out, here's all the prices from the auctions we've done so far, from even mock auctions where people draft for 20 minutes and then log off. And the pricing just gets completely skewed to be top heavy in that sense. So this really gives you that customized blueprint here. Make sure you use a tool like this. And if you don't, you're going to definitely be at a disadvantage, but at least you can listen to some of the values we'll talk about for 2023 drafts later. But I highly, highly recommend customizing a pricing set based on your settings, based on the roster and scoring of your league, because it's such an easy way to gain an edge from everybody else that's just crossing it off a list that has nothing to do with what their league might be. So you get a just enormous edge just from setting your pricing this way. Couldn't recommend it any higher. And Truth, you kind of noticed like you're getting ready for your auction draft tonight. Like, just give us an example of some discrepancies you're already seeing in market stuff.
Well, the first thing I did is I looked on Fantasy Pros, which is, most people are probably doing Yahoo or ESPN drafts. So I wrote down just the Fantasy Pros numbers just to give myself kind of a sense of what I was looking at. And we're actually doing an ESPN draft tonight. And so I then went and compared those with the ESPN numbers. And I mean, some of them are ballpark the same, but there are just drastic swings on these things. What I noticed, and there's exceptions to this, what I noticed is the ESPN prices are higher at the top. So the top guys are priced substantially more than the top guys. Just as an example, let's say Travis Kelce was $46 on Fantasy Pros, $69 on ESPN. That's 150% of his price. And, Nick Chubb, $34 on Fantasy Pros, $51 on ESPN. We're talking about big discrepancies. But then there's a point when you get down to kind of the middle of the stack that it starts flipping the other way, which does make sense, because if you're blowing such huge money on the top guys, there's going to be guys at the bottom that go for peanuts because people don't have much money left. Christian Kirk, $18 on Fantasy Pros, $5 on ESPN. Daniel Jones, $7 on Fantasy Pros, $1 on ESPN. We got big things. So right around the middle, it starts to switch. Mike Williams, 18 on Fantasy Pros, 11 on ESPN. So those guys down there, once you get past the absolute upper echelon guys, actually start getting really, really cheap. Now, we were talking off before we started recording before about how who knows where these values are even coming from. Jackson said he suspected the Yahoo and ESPN numbers are just a total aggregate of what's happened on all of their auction leagues, probably with all different settings and stuff, which makes them worthless, right? Except, like what we also said off camera, it makes them worthless as far as what these guys are actually worth. But when you do your draft, that number is going to be on the screen, and it is going to influence people, right? So
absolutely,
take that into account when you're drafting. If it says DK Metcalf $40, you might go 40. If it says $26, you might go 29. It's going to affect how the draft shakes out. So those are some of the discrepancies I saw.
I think it's a really important point too. Studying the league you're going to be on, whether that's Yahoo, ESPN, studying Fantasy Pros, because that's probably what your league mates are printing out and bringing there for at least half of them. And then also a really important tip, if you can potentially pull it up, if you're nuts like me, which I do every year, studying your own league and looking at the trends in your league and how the spending is done. So I have a tab in my blueprints and all that where I have aggregated like 7-8 years, so past spending. I started doing this today where I just copied and pasted from Yahoo what the top spending was from last year. I greened out where like this would be a kind of round turn. So you can start to get that idea. Like a first rounder on typical would be about $51 to $70. Then by the time you're getting to the end of the second round, players are dropping to 37 in my league. And then I looked, like you can just see there's years and years of this. And it kind of stays pretty consistent. If you wanted to be a real psycho, you could look at like, oh man, Year of the Snake is always taking a balanced approach, whereas the Never Fezzers always want to get the top spent guy. I'm looking through here, and he's got the top spent guy in 3 out of the last 5 years. That's again, if you're crazy like me and have the time, go for it. You don't necessarily have to do that, but that's another way to study your market is because yes, you'll have these trends, but if you've done a bunch of auctions, make sure you take advantage of that data because it's so big. The only other point I did want to bring up with this series and this tool that we have is ultimately that you can tinker, if I'm not mistaken, Jackson, with the projections. So whether you want to make your own projections and mess around with, whether you just want to use the ones that start in the tool like Fantasy Pros, or whether you want to use my own projections, which we'll talk about in a second. Let me just kind of pull that up here. We have a draft guide we just launched out there as of yesterday. And based on my projections, Jackson was able to run those through the tool. And then, so this was what I was getting at when I was talking about the past spending, the psycho tab here. But based on my projections, Jackson was able to run that through and see like, where does the Wolf have huge value? So like plus 11 on Tyreek Hill based on the fact that I have him coming out as a potential wide receiver 1. Whereas, you can see some negatives here. Stephon Diggs, maybe a little overpriced based on the projections I have at this point. So if you want to get those customized auction values, it's just $10. You'll also get, all my projections within there. So maybe you don't even play auction. You'll see all the projections in here. You'll see different team compares. There's just so much in there. And you'll, of course, get the entire guide that comes with that, a round by round cheat sheet, our penny stocks, the sleepers that are going to blow up, running back strategy, how to dominate the most important positions. So to me, $10, well worth it. Just wanted to quickly pump that. If you just want to support what we do, a lot of people do add comments like, you had something I can buy, anything of that nature. This is really it. This is the only premium thing we do. We want to get all our content to you for pretty much free. Jackson's tool, I think, should be a $50 tool. We put it up there for free, given the edge it can give you. It should be worth way more, but we just want to give you guys as much as we can. So if you do want to support your boys, that thumbs up button is an easy, free way to do it. But of course, that $10 would go. I think it's well worth the money. Ultimate strategy and round by round picks and where do we see positional drop-offs and those projections and those auction values. So I did just want to quickly pump that up as well. If I'm one of your more trusted sources and you want to use my auction values, you could always pay for that and get those as well. But am I correct, Jackson, with this tool, you can kind of tinker with projections and it will even, so not only to scoring settings and to league roster settings, but also to whatever you might think projections are. Is that right?
Right. So one thing you can do here is like if you're playing on ESPN and Kelsey is listed as like $50, then you can just put in 50 here. And then on the auction tab, you can see that and you can look at the discrepancy. But what Wolf was talking about is like there's projections here. And I guess you could technically type over these, but probably the better way to do it is you want to right click and then unhide and go to QB raw. So if you want to change the quarterback projections, like Mahomes on the Fantasy Pros aggregated projections right now is projected 610.8 pass attempts. But like, if I think he's going to have 700 pass attempts, then I can just type 700 in there. And then maybe he has 500, maybe he has 500 completions and then like 5,500 yards. And then if I type all that stuff in, then I can go back here and then it has all of those filled right here, and then that's going to like flow through to everything else, and it's going to bump up his price since I changed the yardage and stuff.
Perfect. So again, this tool, you can customize both of your settings, the roster sizes, and your own projections. You can't beat it. It's 100% free. $10 as well if you want my own personal customized things. Once you have your prices set, though, the next big thing is to get your budgets and game plans ready. So I love to take a position. You can keep this as simple or as complicated as you'd like. I personally like to say, I'm willing to spend up to $100 on running back. What would that roster look like? I want to maybe take a more balanced approach. What might that look like? So I will go into an auction. As you guys can see, if you're watching live or you can just listen in on the pod, you can see I have multiple builds here. So for example, I personally am a stud and scrub approach. I will spend the bare minimum on my bench in almost every auction draft, give or take if I get a player cheaper within the early rounds, but like I'll put out a balanced budget. And so from here, I'll say, I'm going to go cheap on quarterback, and that's typically what I do. So most of these builds will have that. I might have, though, an elite QB build and put in Allen, Mahomes, Hurts, $30. And I always like to go a little bit over what I think the market's asking, because maybe I have to go $1 over. I always want to be willing to pay up for a buck or two. We'll get into the actual tips in a second and when you're in the heat of the moment. But I always like to, when I'm making this game plan, go a little bit above. So if CMC is projecting for 62 on Yahoo, I might write in 65. So that way I have it kind of built in that I'm willing to keep going up and up and up. So I have, a balanced RB wide receiver RB build. Maybe I'm back to my bell cow ways. If you read the guide, you'll know that I am kind of jellyfishing away, but I also still love teams that are running back, like a CMC Pollard build. If Pollard's projected for 45, I write in 50 here. And I see, maybe I have to take the hit. Now I can't have Garrett Wilson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, or Waddle at 40, but I might get Pollard. And then I drop down to Calvin Ridley, who's projected to go for only 20 to 25. I think if that happens, ridiculous steal. But you can just see all these different builds. I want a type of build out with Travis Kelce. So I'll make sure to have a Travis Kelce build. So if he goes for $50, which is exactly where I think he should, and maybe even up to 55, I'll have one ready so that in the middle of the auction, the heat of the auction, I can just flip. And now I have my Travis Kelce build here, 55 for Kelce. What does that do to that? So I can just kind of keep bouncing. One, I can just kind of see which one do I like the most. And then two, when the heat of the moment hits, I can then say, okay, I've started to build around Kelce. I'm going to now continue to project out on this in the heat of the moment. So that's my cheap version of doing it, my easy version of doing it. The better version of doing it, though, is the tool that Jackson has. Again, I cannot emphasize enough how great this tool is, because not only can you make these projections and builds, this tool will also start to calculate what your projected scoring might be, and it can even give you that much of a bigger edge. So, Jackson, why don't you show us this part, the Build Your Team tab in here?
So yeah, I did make this myself, this specific tab, because I thought it would be a useful addition to the existing tool. So what you want to do is start with the yellow cells, and then you want to just match up these positions based on your league settings. So like, let's say I have 3 wide receivers, a flex, and then a tight end. So that was different than like the default ones. So then I'm going to make the changes here and then hit update player drop downs. And then it's just going to automatically change like the drop downs for each selection. So, and then you can kind of just put in whatever combinations you want. And then it's going to track your total projected points, total real value, and then your expected price here. So like you can see the team that's already in here, you would be expected to spend about $195 based on the AAV data, but it's actually worth $215.60. And then you can kind of like just put in whatever combinations you want. Like if I want Kyle Pitts here, and then maybe we need to save money. I'm just putting in names, but
any other name, not Kyle Pitts. For the love of God.
There's one name in the NFL that is guaranteed to get like the same reaction from both me and the Wolf.
Sorry, Jack. You're giving a great overview of your tool, and I had to just give a quick puke to Kyle Pitts. But continue forward.
All right, well, then you can put in someone else besides Kyle Pitts. Like we can put
anybody.
can put in Goddard here and then
Love him.
take the tight end out of the flex real quick. Let's just put in Calvin Ridley because Wolf talked about him before. But like you can see, I'm just putting in whatever players I want, and then you can test all those builds that the Wolf had on his other screen. And then now I'm under budget. I've only spent $173, but I have $186 worth of value. So you can kind of just put in whatever combinations you want and then just save these projected points and then real value numbers and kind of just try to maximize it based on your league settings.
So it's an awesome tool again, in that sense, to come up with all these different game plans, make copies of that and just say, here's going to be my running back heavy. How many points would come out of that? You can just keep messing around. It's such a useful tool. It's so much more user-friendly than what I had in my Google Sheets. I just don't have the Excel sheet on my computer because I'm using a Mac right now. Otherwise, I would be absolutely showing that off as well. So come up with your budget, 110 for running backs, 60 for wide receivers, 15 max for quarterback, and $1 for tight end. I don't recommend that. And maybe we can talk a little bit about how we might be budgeting specifically in 2023 now. My personal preference is absolutely all my game plans. I have at least $15 at tight end. I will not go below the George Kittle, Darren Waller, TJ Hawkinson tier. I think it's just a big mistake to pass up those potential points. I think they're going potentially underpriced if they hit the ceilings I'm expected, like especially for Darren Waller, who's mapped out to go for 7, for example. That's an absolute steal. But even if you went up to 15, I'd be cool with. But I pretty much am going in with a set game plan of at least a $15 starting tight end. Have obviously the Travis Kelce build with 55 and what that looks like. A Mark Andrews with 28. So I personally am budgeting in a pretty high amount for tight end. Some people might completely punt it. How are you guys? I know tight end is, it really is just such a weird way to start your builds and your budgets. But honestly, I think it's a really important piece to what you're going to do. So what's your opinion, Truth, on tight end? Are you trying to get a top 6 guy like me, or are you more punting the position? Yeah.
Yes, I am actually. And sometimes I develop some of these opinions because you and I talk a lot, and I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. That's actually an opinion I came to on my own. I actually was interested. I mean, you always have to be a little bit interested in Kelce himself, but it's just at the price that he's going to probably go for, I'll bet I don't get him. As great as I am, even if you've heard me tout, maybe it makes sense for him to be the first overall pick in a snake draft. He's that good. I don't think I'm going to end up with him, but I do want to get one of the next tier guys. Absolutely. I don't like the idea after you get like 7 deep or whatever of just punting, because then you might end up with like a 2-point game, 3-point game. And I feel like that's death. So I do budget around 15 as well at that spot. How about you, Jackson?
Yeah, I think just the main thing I want to do is get a couple of top players regardless of position. And if one of those happens to be Kelce, that's fine. And if not, that's also fine. I'd probably go a little bit cheaper if not. But I do like Waller, like they've said before. But if you just build enough of these teams on the build team sheet, then basically whichever 2 studs you get to start, then you're going to be able to fill in the rest just based on like a team that you've already planned. So I guess if Kelce's there for a good price, I'll take him. And I also like Andrews, especially if I can get him at like half the cost, since Andrews outscored him in 2021. But just kind of just stick to a certain team that you've built on here based on like your top players, I think would be my general strategy.
I think you brought up a really good point though, like at least 2 studs. I'm fully with you. There's always the balanced approach versus the studs and duds. I'm all about studs and scrubs. I have never done an auction otherwise, and it's by far my favorite approach. I feel good because we all, if you've ever done an auction, know at a certain point, it just kind of becomes a snake draft. Typically around the like round 9 to 10 players even, at least in my league, because it's pretty heavy spending early on. So you're suddenly in a snake draft where all these guys that probably should have gone for $3 to $5 to sometimes even $7 are now just flying off the board for 1 because everybody's spent their money. Now, I get the value of potentially being that guy that can control those rounds and say, no one else can bid more than $2. Like you can somehow stack your bench, but a lot of times those are the people that end up leaving money on the table. And we'll transition in a sec to the in the game tips of the things I want to do. But I am fully there with you. Studs and scrubs, at least 2 stars, whether that ends up being, and often, like I mentioned in what I was looking through my budgets, I love spending 2 big running backs. I know that's not a surprise because I'm a running back guy historically. I also do love spending big on a running back and then also maybe a Garrett Wilson and Amon-Ra St. Brown, the tier 2 receivers. Maybe not Jefferson where he's going 70. He's going over CMC. I love getting a CMC Eckler in that $60 range and then maybe pivoting to a $40 receiver in that second tier. Those are some of the most common bids, whether it's a CMC Pollard, whether it's a Eckler and Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I have a little more balance to my team. And of course, you got to have a build around Kelsey if he ends up being your stud. But I can't emphasize enough, I'm a studs and scrubs guy. It sounded like, Jackson, you said you were. Truth, is that typically how you've pursued your auctions in the past as well?
Yeah, I usually end up with 1 or 2 big-time guys. I had a team 2 years ago that was one of the best drafts that I've ever had, and I had the worst luck that any human beings ever had during a football season in my life. But in that draft, I went CMC. Remember, we were all in on CMC, and I think I spent $72 on him. And of course, that's a huge amount of my budget. And then I got Calvin Ridley for a really good price. Well, that was the year that CMC got hurt after like 3 games, and Calvin Ridley decided he was going to, play the ponies as it were. And things went really bad for me. But yeah, those were my 2 studs that year. I did get lucky that year because I got the Stafford Cooper Kupp stack for like $15 total or something like that. And you'd be surprised what that could negate as far as injuries and stuff like that. Yeah, I always try to get 2 big guys. I don't want to suck anywhere. I know that's just that makes sense. That's not like hard hitting data or anything like that. But I want to at least be pretty well rounded. You hate going into a starting lineup with anybody that you don't feel good about. You hate throwing in who sucks, who's somebody that's terrible.
I mean, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. There's plenty of people who suck.
Greg Ward.
Yeah, Greg Ward, exactly.
You don't want Greg Ward in your starting lineup. Shout out MOH.
Yeah. But I think that's a really good point, too, is like when you're making your budget, I don't know if I've even said the idea of just like, I map out pretty much 90% to my starting lineup, and maybe sometimes even more. Yeah. $1 a person on my bench. You highlight the dangers of studs and scrubs. The 2 studs you pay up for get hurt. You're in a world of pain, and that's shitty. That's like any fantasy draft. If your first 2 round picks get hurt, you're probably not going anywhere. And you just even illustrate the fact that, like, yes, you can spend up big, but then you pluck in every draft, there's always like a middle tier of receivers, the Lockett's, the Evans, the kind of unsexy guys that no one's paying up for. Deontay Johnson this year, even though he's about to see 160 targets. There's always those guys that ended up being Cooper Kupp a couple of years ago that are never going to go for more than $7 to $12, even though they're 4th, 5th rounders. And you can suddenly pluck those even after you've gotten maybe 2 first-round guys in your lineup. Yeah, I'm all for it. You can't draft scared. We said that 1,000,001 times. So sure, you might lose your 2 studs and then you're toast, but it's well worth it, especially if you feel confident in your late rounds drafting abilities. If you bought the guide and you got your late round penny stocks ready to go, you absolutely should go all in on your starting lineup and try to pepper as many studs into there as you can. Is there any other game? Yeah.
I wanted to throw one more thing in. This might fall more under in-draft strategy, which I know you're about to talk about anyway. But one other issue that I didn't bring up earlier when we were talking is the issue of the size of your stack, basically, and how when you spend your money can drastically affect like what you're able to get in a draft. So, and some of this is luck, and there's some skill, strategy, intentionality about it. If you spend $70 on a guy right out of the gate, even if he's a guy that you really want, and then you blow another 50 on a guy fairly soon after that, is another guy you want. It's not too long before you're going to be the rest of the guys are just going to be able to bully you on everything. So like if you end up with $10 to spend on your last 8 guys or something like that, like you're almost going to have to get lucky to get any of them. Because if you nominate somebody for $1 and somebody goes $2, you can't bid back at that point. And so there, to me, there's a real balancing act of like when you spend your money. And I was just wondering, A, do you agree that that's a big deal? And B, do you address that anyway, or do you just kind of go in on tilt and are like, I'm going to get my guys, I don't care?
It's a perfect segue into the in-game domination, because I do think you have to get a feel. That's probably the number one tip is you toss a player out and you get a feel very early on what's this auction going to be like? Because no two drafts are the same, but especially no two auctions. You might realize, so I'll bring up a counter example to your point there, Truth, in terms of somebody nominated CMC first last year. I didn't have CMC particularly. Like, obviously, I loved CMC, but he wasn't in my initial budgets. I had him mapped to go for $67 though, and I go to 62. And going once, going twice, sold. CMC's on my team. Oh shit, I didn't expect that.
Right.
Eckler gets nominated 3 players later. I have him at 65. I nominate up to 60. Going once, going twice, sold. Suddenly I have CMC and Eckler. And very good problem there. And clearly last year that was a very great combo. But I was a little bit hamstrung, right? So now I was like, fuck,
right.
Now I have to adjust and sit. But it was a very tight room to start. Nobody was spending money. It was, you could tell right away that everyone was a little nervous to get going. And that actually has been kind of historically true for my league. So if you know how your league does, early on, people kind of waited out. So I was fine with that. And I still was able to get AJ Brown for $25 later on. So yes, I was out of the action for a while. I didn't get AJ Brown till he got nominated as like the 115th player off the board. But that's where I started sneaking like a kicker, a defense. And I knew there was nothing else I could do. Or I started getting more running backs nominated to get more money into the game. But yes, I think very early on, you want to see, how is this going? Is money just flying? Because if that's the case, I'm going to start nominating expensive players that I might not be all in on. CeeDee Lamb, for example, I'm not all in on this year. But if I see wide receiver money is just going crazy this year because everyone's preached 0 running back and you need the target hogs, I'll toss out CeeDee Lamb early, let somebody spend $65, and then maybe I get CMC later for cheaper. If money's tight, I'm going to nominate somebody I want and try to sneak them into my lineup. So you absolutely have to read the market. I'll never say, you want to wait around versus getting in early. It's all about that feel that you're getting. The other in-game domination, then I'll kind of toss it out to you guys too. In relation to that is, yes, money could be flying and you want to wait it out because it's a hot market, but you also, the worst spot to be in, it's happened to me one year where the first year of our auction, Des Bryant goes for $78 because 2 guys got in a big dick contest. And then, every player suddenly going for $70. I'm like, listen, everyone's going for $15 more. I'm just going to wait this out and I'll get everyone I want in a little bit. Well, one other owner had the same idea. And so everybody flew off the money for the studs. And suddenly you're in this mid-tier hell with another owner that's like, no, I really want Justin Forsett. And it just becomes like, suddenly you're paying 15 more for shitty players when you should have probably just spent 15 more for the studs and gotten there. So
that's the worst.
There's no worse feeling than that when you're quibbling with one other owner who had the same idea that I'm going to be the guy to get all those mid-tier players for wicked cheap and have a nice balanced approach. That's why I preach the studs and duds, because even in a hot market, I'll probably still go in and try to get my guys. There's nothing worse than being in that position. So on that note, don't quibble for the $1 to $2. Yes, have a limit. Like if I had CMC projected for 65, he's at 68, maybe I get to 69, but no, 70, I'll bow out. But you don't ever want to look back and say, there's always going to be a player on your bench that you paid like $7 for. Like, I could have had a $1 guy instead of the $7 guy and gotten Christian McCaffrey, who I was in love with. So if you're in love with somebody, that's the point of the auction. Get your guys. There's no worse feeling than knowing you could have had them for a couple bucks more and you just bitched out a little too quickly. You also always have to understand too. So I'm just going to rip through a few of mine, and then of course any others that you have to. So we talked about when to use your nominations. If money's flying, nominate the big names, get people to spend money on the players you don't like, the people that were getting training camp hype that you don't believe in, get the money flying on them, and then sneak in. But if the pricing's soft, nominate the guys you want and go get them while it is soft before people realize, oh man, these guys are going way too cheap. But you also want to always nominate when you're using nomination strategy in general is just really important. The other way to nominate, in my opinion, is it's always great to pick out a tier and find the guy in that tier you might not love, throw them out there and kind of let them set the pricing of that tier. Or maybe the top of that tier, let's say it's the wide receiver ones. I know I really want like one of those top 5 receivers. I have my price, I really want Tyreek Hill because I think he's going $12 cheaper than Justin Jefferson. I might toss out Jefferson right away so that he goes for $70. And that way people will be like, there's no way I'm going to bid up to 65 for Tyreek Hill. And you can set and kind of gauge the pricing all at once of a specific tier. If that's what you're going after, do that in a soft market versus if the money's flying around and there's a tier you want to target, obviously you don't put that in there too. So filling out the room, using your nominations wisely. knowing when to bow out and not get into those battles of pride is a big point. Understanding those tiers and never wanting to be the last person, because everybody will recognize like, oh, this is the last big receiver of this group. And whereas Garrett Wilson went for $35 and St. Brown's the last of the true wide receiver ones to get nominated, he goes for 45 because everybody's waiting there. You never want to be at the end of the tier. You always want to kind of let it get set and find your way into the middle and the guy you get. Never always works out perfectly, but you always want to understand that. And the last tip I'll get at is don't be a price cop. That never ends up working well for me. And what I mean by that is, let's say somebody nominates, I like J.K. Dobbins, but let's pretend I didn't. And I see him going for $14, and on my list I have that he should be going for 16. And then I bid up to $16. I'm just making sure this person doesn't get a sneaky value. And then going once, going twice, suddenly I've just sunk $20 into a player that I didn't really want. Whether I'm just trying to F with somebody or I just see somebody going for cheaper than they want, even though I don't like them. It's never a good idea to be the price police. I
cannot agree with you more on this. Like this has resonated with me. Of all the good points both of you guys have made, this is the thing that you've said that I just want to emphasize this. If this were a text chain, I would put the little 2 exclamation marks next to it so people would know that I was emphasizing this. Dude, that's how I wonder if this is how this happened to you last year too. That's how I ended up with Leonard Fournette last year, who I had absolutely no interest in going into the draft, and who you picked up and told me, I can't believe I got this guy. I wasn't even looking for him. And then I was like, that was dumb of him. And then 10 minutes later, he was on my team. And that's it. That's how it happened. It was like, well, this is cheaper than he should be going for. I'm going to bid. And next thing you know, you spent $35 on a guy you didn't even want.
Yep. That's exactly what happened with Leonard Fournette for me. That was my first auction of the year, not the one that I got CMC and Eckler in. The exact same thing. I think I got him for like $29, which on paper he should have been going for 35. It was a great. I was like, too cheap for Fournette. Ding. And then they started counting down, and you sit there, and if it's a player, just kind of think this in your head. If this started going once, going twice, and you and your gut are like, oh no, someone bid. Like, if you think that's going to be a feeling you'd have about someone, don't get involved. Just stay away. Some sites have like I'm not bidding buttons that you can just press so you don't even tempt yourself with price policing.
The fact that you and I did that basically in back-to-back drafts with the same guy after you had told me that it had happened to you, and I had rolled my eyes and thought, what a sucker. And then I mean, that is incredible.
Yeah.
And it was bad. And by the way, I had a really bad season last year.
I had a mostly good season, but yeah, Leonard Fournette was not the reason for that. I'll tell you that much. That price policing did not pay out for me.
I ended up with Josh Gordon one time doing that. On one of like the 7 years that we had convinced ourselves that he might come back and be good.
Yeah. Fool's gold. Is there any more? I know I threw a lot out fast, but like Jackson, can you think of any other just in-game domination trick, beyond just knowing your prices, budgeting and audibles, those first 2 steps? When you're in the heat of the moment, is there any other tips or tricks that you really recognize our listeners pay attention to?
So, yeah, one other thing I wanted to mention is this starter percentage cell here is actually really important. Like after you put in your number of starters, you're going to want to change this. So my rule of thumb is I generally want this starter PF cell right here to be about 4 times the bench cell, but you could even bump it up a little bit more if you're worried about, like the Wolf was talking about earlier, like all the top players going for really expensive. Because if that happens, you still want one of the top players, at least in my opinion, to avoid the situation where you're just stuck with like all the mid-tier guys. So right now it's 92%, which essentially means like you want 92% of the money going to your starters, but I could bump it up to like 94%. And then if I go to the auction tab, like all the top guys are going to be really high, given that there's a high starter percentage. So it just really helps if you've played in the league before with the same settings and stuff. So you kind of have an idea of what the top guys are going to go for. So like you might not actually want to spend 80 on Kelsey. Because another thing too is these values are based on projections, and they obviously assume the projections are perfect, and that's exactly what's going to happen. But there may not be as big of a gap between Kelsey and Andrews and the other guys as the projections say. So you do want to leave yourself with like a little bit of margin if you can. But the starter percent sell is a thing that a lot of people overlook, and it can help you avoid getting into trouble if you manage it the right way.
Perfect. So yeah, know how much you want to budget those starters and what your history is, what you maybe need to adjust for your leagues. Is there any other like in the moment, heat of the moment, people get dominated, whether it's domination strategy, bidding strategy in the moment? Is there any others that we haven't covered? I know we had a pretty big list, but I want to just make sure we cover it all before we start to look at the 2023 market with everybody.
I got one other tip, and it's kind of like it sounds really obvious, but I see people do this sometimes. You're bidding back and forth, say going like, 23, 24, 25, and then the next person goes 30. It's like, don't do that. like what? Don't throw $5 away just because you're trying to like whip it out and twirl it around. Just if it's somebody that is going to go for 70, then sure, you could bump it up to 30 or whatever. But I see people make flex bids when it's clearly $1 at a time, just throwing away money. It's kind of like in poker, going all in instead of keeping just a few dollars. It's like you're just giving away money for nothing at the end. Don't do that. I see it all the time, and it's stupid.
I 100% agree. I saw that. I've done one auction so far this year, and I believe it was Travis Etienne, and he was at, I think the exact numbers you're using there, he was at like 25, and then somebody just puts 40 in.
Yeah,
and
right.
Nobody else bid, and
Like,
it's just like, what could you have gotten him for? Maybe
probably could have gotten him for 27.
40, but yeah, like you don't know, so you just bid 15 more bucks than you had to. So yeah, I that one resonates well, because the last auction I was in, I saw that, I just started cracking up. Like, what the hell was that bid? Like, yeah, so it's a really good point. Did any others pop to mind, Jackson, or no?
I think you've covered pretty much everything I can think of. Like, the one thing to emphasize would be you just have to get at least one stud, even if every stud is going for more than you'd like. And
yeah,
ideally you want to get two. And it's also a lot easier to trade studs for depth than the other way around after the auction's over. Right. So like worst case scenario, there's going to be at least one or two teams that just have a team like Wolf was talking about, where like every single guy's like at least $10. So even if you go like too heavy on studs, I'd rather be in that position, because you can probably just make a trade after.
That's a good point.
It's a great point. And then it also kind of helps you put it into perspective. Like when you're trading, you never want to be the guy that's like getting 3 mediocre pieces for a stud. So if you kind of put yourself in that mindset in season, where you laughed at somebody sent you Antonio Gibson, and I'm trying to think of like a couple mid-tier receivers, like Antonio Gibson and James Conner, plus a even less attractive, like I don't even know. I'm trying to toss out like one other, like in Pat Freiermuth, let's say,
sure,
for Saquon Barkley. You're going to just be like, no, right. I don't want 3 mediocre guys for your one guy. You do have to factor in, like, as benches get deeper. So if you're in like a 20 roster spots, or a 14 team league, for example, and waiver wires are going to be real thin, then you might have to factor that in a little bit, because then, the cost of one big stud and that stud going down, that can truly ruin your season. But if you're in a 12-team league, or especially if you're in a 10-team league where the waiver wire is going to have plenty of similar guys to the $5-4 guys that you didn't really need, then it makes way more sense to be stud and dud. And even in a deeper league, I still like the idea of making sure you have at least one stud, if not 2. But you do want to keep depth in mind and how deep you're going to have to go as well, because I've done like a 14-man, 20-person, 20 roster size. And whereas a 12-team, I went in with a blow my money early. And usually in a 12-team league, those $1 guys are like, okay, I like this guy. Nico Collins for $1, Sky Moore for $1, Juju for $1, Higbee for $1. If you're in a deep league, you're suddenly playing into like, who's a horrendous tight end?
Greg Ward.
Who's that?
Greg Ward.
You keep bringing Greg Ward. Like, is he even in the NFL anymore?
Didn't you get that text that MOH sent us earlier today? He's on the practice.
Yeah, he's still on the roster.
He's on the practice. He's on the practice squad.
You're looking at, I wanted to throw out like, Kyron Williams. I love Kyron Williams. Like, who's this? Like Jordan Mason, for example, is suddenly coming onto your bench, and Rico Dowdle Dearness Johnson, the third string back for the Jags. Like suddenly that's what becomes your player. So you do have to know if you're in a deeper league, like your bench is going to be hideous if you go too hard. But at the end of the day, the waiver wires aren't going to have any replaceability. So do know that as well. And that's what, again, use Jackson's tool to set the pricing because that will really help guide you through, I can spend this much or I can't spend this much. But I would like to, I'm going to pull in the actual pricing now of some players, unless there's any other tips you guys want to.
I just want to reiterate, I won't take more than 10 seconds, but I really like what Jackson said because it's something that I know is true, but sometimes like it doesn't immediately come to mind when you're drafting, just how much easier it is to flip a stud for pieces than the other way around. Like that's a great point because I get multiple, whenever I have a stud, I get so many bullshit offers from people that are like offering me 3. They're like, oh, this will give you really good depth. And I just laugh and close the email. The studs keep their value after they've left the lot. A lot more than you're going to, oh, this is really good value. Well, you can only start one guy. Like you only got so many things you can start. Like I'm not exactly trying to build my bench at the expense of losing like a 20-point a game guy. So great point. I agree. I'm going to keep that in mind when I'm drafting tonight.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to pull in, and this is just specifically Yahoo. And as we already alluded to, like every single site is going to be wildly different. And that's why you want to know those prices, then compare them to what people should be paying based on what you've done in the tool and customize. But based on Yahoo, looking through here, Jefferson's at the top at 68. We can start with him as a talking point, and Ja'Marr Chase. I don't want to spend more for those two elite receivers. I know I'd probably take Jefferson first overall if it's a 3-receiver league, but let's say it's a 2-receiver league. I think Christian McCaffrey should absolutely be the first guy. So if he's going to be going cheaper, that's one of the big discrepancies I already see. Plus, you see 68 for Jefferson, 54 for Tyreek Hill, $14. That could be the difference between getting, I'm trying to think like the RB2. Like you could go from Joe Mixon as your RB2 all the way down to, if we keep scrolling, Joe Mixon right here, he's like, it says 26. I mean, that would be a steal. Let's say you pay 30 for Mixon. Instead, you're now at James Conner, David Montgomery, which aren't bad. I like those guys as a flex potentially for $8, but I'd rather have Joe Mixon and Tyreek Hill than Justin Jefferson and James Conner. I don't know what you guys feel about that, but
yeah, I think going along with what you've said and what Jackson said is you want to make sure you get 1-2 studs. Tyreek Hill and Justin Jefferson are both studs. And if you can get one of them that you think is a legit, Tyreek Hill could be the wide receiver 1. That's not impossible at all. You can get one of those guys for $15 cheaper. That ain't nothing. That's a big deal. That's the difference between, getting Darren Waller and Greg Ward.
Right. Think about your tight end. That's a really good way to frame it. Like I know I framed the Tyreek Hill and this running back for that, but like that could be Dalton Schultz at your tight end spot or George Kittle at your tight end spot. That, again, and that's oftentimes you want to kind of think, and that's where you create these blueprints is, do I want this player, these two players, or do I want these two players? It's a helpful way to frame like how much should I really be spending on these guys. So looking at like the most expensive guys, another couple that I don't know if you guys can see, I can zoom in a little bit more. Pollard at 44, like stands out huge to me. I would pay up to 55 for him based on my projection. I absolutely am in love with Pollard. Chubb under 50 would be great. Barkley for 46 would be great. I think that tier of running backs seems really attractive to me. Is there any other like early round guys? So these are kind of like the first 2 rounds of people that are standing out to you as I kind of scroll through.
Are you just talking about running backs or guys we like in general?
Anyone in general on this, like kind of the first like 30 players, which is essentially the first 2 rounds, 2.5 rounds.
I love Amon-Ra.
Yeah, $36 for Amon-Ra.
Yeah.
37. That tier of receivers looks kind of nice. 37 for Garrett Wilson. Jalen Waddle, 35.
AJ Brown right in there also.
AJ Brown, 42. Now you're starting to get a little bit over, but like, if you budget 40 for your receiver and that ends up being AJ Brown, awesome. It ends up being ASB for 36, awesome as well. That's as you're making your game plan. Do I want a wide receiver 1 at $40 or do I want my wide receiver 1 at 70? Like I kind of like playing with that tier for sure as my my budget. What about you, Jackson? Anything like standing out between the most expensive price guys, at least on Yahoo?
I just think you have to keep in mind that like if you're seeing studs go for a reasonable price at the beginning, I would just kind of take them almost no matter who it is. But
Yeah.
I think you can kind of get into trouble when you're targeting like specific guys and you're waiting too long for the one guy. And then if they go for like $8 more than you budgeted, then you're kind of screwed.
That's a good point.
But I mean, yeah, I like Amon Ra a lot for that price. I think Devontae Adams is a little bit underrated this year just because he's been so good for so long and he has a way better track record of production than like anyone else around that area.
I like Waddle.
Yeah, he has some upside. I mean, there's a lot of different guys you can go for, obviously, but I think the one thing I do want to avoid is like kind of once you get to around the 3rd to 5th roundish in Snake, like I don't think those guys are really that drastically better than the people going in like the 6th and 7th round a lot of times, especially at receiver. So like if you can be drafting the wide receiver 24 instead of wide receiver 16, but you can get him for half the price, I think that's like a big area where you can win.
Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal point. So I think you made 2 huge points. One is you absolutely want to be thinking of it, kind of harkens back to our earlier point of these guys in tiers. Not I need Amon-Ra St. Brown. I need one of the low end wide receiver ones in that $35 to $40 range. Whichever one that ends up being is absolutely the right mindset to have. You don't want to get locked in because your player might be the one that goes for way too high. So I think that's a huge point. And that's why when I make my blueprints, I often will write, you can see here, like this is the tier of QB, Daniel Jones, Richardson, Geno, Tua. So like the last of the QB1s tier, one of those guys is going to go for $3. So I like Daniel Jones the most. I might list them out in the order I want them. My wide receiver 3 in this one, and really all these kind of harkens to that last point you made. Whichever, there's always happens in every auction. There's 4 to 5 receivers. Tyler Lockett in my league last year went for $4 because that was at the point where everyone had blown money and the one guy that was saving it had stacked his bench with a bunch of $4 guys, but he also left the draft with $15 on his bench too. So
Don't do
that always ends up happening though. So like that, like you said, Jackson, like the wide receiver 16 to the wide receiver 30, very similar production, but the wide receiver 30 in price is probably going to be half the price of the wide receiver 16. So that's why I wrote in Ayuk, Evans, Lockett, Deontay, Christian Watson. I'd love to have Watson or Ayuk that are sexier. They're probably going to go for $20, and then Evans will sneak in $7. And would I rather have the other two? Sure, but are they guaranteed to outproduce Evans by a $14 gap? Probably not either. So yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. That like, yeah, we could kind of look through these prices and pick out our favorite players, but it might be more so like looking through and figuring out where do we see some decent price drops. Like we noticed the elite QB ones on that first page were like $29 to $32. Josh Allen's at 26-ish. So do I want that elite QB1 tier, or do I want to then move into, I noticed earlier when I was looking through some of these values, like Justin Herbert isn't even on this first page. Justin Fields is at $7 to $7 to $10. So maybe I'd rather budget in like a mid-tier QB1. Herbert, 8.4 to 5. Trevor Lawrence, 6.6 to 5. Yes, I love a Josh Allen, a Jalen Hurts, but maybe I'm looking at that tier, and it's not like I'm locked in on Trevor Lawrence, but a Lawrence, a Herbert, or a Justin Fields, a Joe Burrow. That tier is seeming to stand out to me, pricing wise at quarterback. Any thoughts on that, or other tiers that you're just seeing like pop out to you guys?
Yeah, I think quarterback is like another area where once I get like my top guys and I'll kind of have a better idea of how much money I have to spend there. Like I'm perfectly fine spending up for a top quarterback. If not, then like one of the mid-tier guys like Lawrence or Watson, I think is fine. And then, or you could just go like super cheap with Anthony Richardson or like other guys like that who have like significant upside late. So it just kind of depends on the rest of my build, I guess.
Yeah. I'm looking at this page. I see Jahan Dotson for 2.4. I think he's been buzzed and steamed lately, so I know that cheap. But man, if you could get Dotson for $4, I know we're not. Right as we preach, don't lock in one player. they go and do that. But you can just see Dotson 4, Evans 5, Williams 6. You know, that wide receiver 3. Marquise Brown's probably going to go for $2 because no one wants him with nobody thrown to him, but he's going to see 10 targets a game. So even if
Waller,
garbage
3.
thrown to him, he'll be okay. What were you saying there, Truth?
So Waller 3.
Yeah, and there's no way Waller's going for $3. But I mean, jeez. And then like you can see like Gibson. This is why again I preach like go all in on your starters because Gibson 2, Addison 2, Gabe Davis 2, Swift 4. Like as you can see, the prices really do drop off dramatically. Like by the time you get to the quote unquote round 8, that's why I like when I'm highlighting my leagues past spending. I like to kind of highlight here's the next 12, here's the next 12. So I can get a feel like, okay, in my league, historically, by round 8, people are going for $1 to $2. And so I really want to capitalize on that and take those guys that should probably be going for $4 to $5. You can see that kind of happen here. Sutton, Elijah Moore, I don't love Bateman, JSN $2, Brian Robinson, so you could just see like it gets so cheap so fast. So even if it's a little bit of a hot market, like don't be scared to get your studs. You'll be able to find and pick off some of these values. And I bet a lot of these guys, Rashad Penny says 5. He's not going to go for more than $3. I just definitely study the prices on your draft because you can really pick out those pockets and then kind of list out a few in those spots you want. And in my flex, I know I want one of the really cheap receivers because that's going to really let me squeeze out 2 great running backs and an elite quarterback. So my flex won't be more than $2. But it could be Gabe Davis, Swift, Gibson. I might write like 8 different names in there. And then whichever one ends up going for only $2 to $3, bam, I'm happy to slot him in there. So yeah, I'm trying to think of anything else. Like, I don't think it's probably that useful to go through and like pick out every single player and discuss their value. The other thing I guess I would say though is yes, I love preaching, get your starters and blow a lot of money. If you can so I think about that draft where I got AJ Brown for 25 after getting Eckler and CMC. I didn't bid on anyone for maybe an hour and a half. And that was painful. Like it sucks to just kind of sit there. And that's why it does suck to go all in. But soon enough, if you keep your eyes on your maximum bid, you'll start to see people keep going down. And AJ Brown last year should have probably gone for 30, 35, but I was able to suddenly sneak him. And then the time Cortland Sutton was going to be an amazing value. I got him for like $13. He ended up fucking sucking. But the thought process of this guy that's kind of a third rounder going for $13, I did. Yes, you can blow your money early, but then also still eventually get that leg up on building the bench and just getting every single player you want. I do like to factor in like $5 to $6 extra towards the end, even though I want to go big on the starters if you get in that position of power, not the picking up the mid-tier guys back and forth battling with the other person that's in that spot. That position sucks. But once those guys are kind of done draining and bleeding each other, then you can kind of rise back up from the ashes and start to pick off those guys. That's one of the best positions you can possibly be in. You have a couple studs, and now you're getting some real good studs because everybody else has drained each other. If you can have that patience and wait, that's a great spot to be in too.
You remember when Allen Robinson didn't suck?
Yeah. I mean, not really, but I think I was like a 3-year-old child at that point.
No, so the last year he didn't suck. I got him for $8 doing the exact thing you're talking about.
When he was on the Bears and had like 1,200 yards.
Great.
Yeah. I mean, Cooper Kupp you got like just 2 years ago, right? For like $12.
Yeah, but Cooper Kupp I got at about what he was going for at the time.
Okay.
Like, I just felt he was a good deal. Do you remember at the time, like you and me, like it was unclear who do we want, Kupp or Robert Woods? Remember, it was like about even, and I decided I wanted Kupp.
Which Rams receiver do you want?
Right, and
I do remember that.
I did get him for about what he was going for. He just ended up being a really great deal.
Yeah.
Robinson went significantly under what his price was on the board.
Yeah. Any other last tips before we have about 14 questions? I don't know if either you guys got to get running. I can mow through them quick, but is there any other last, like anything we haven't covered or any players you want to shout out, Jackson?
I think you pretty much covered everything with that last part. I think I'm happy to answer questions if anyone has them, though.
Sweet. So one final plug again, guys. Check out Jackson's free tool. I can't emphasize enough. Like the fact that this is free is crazy. It allows you to get such a big leg up to figure out what the prices should be, how many different ways you can plan and budget. I cannot hype up enough how great that is. And if you are willing to support the site, please do consider, the link is in the description, or you can just go to rotostreetjournal.com and it will be right there in the top corner for you. Consider buying our guide, supporting your boys. You'll get my customized auction values in addition to a whole round by round game plan that you can then kind of apply to your auction draft strategies as well, knowing that round 7 guys go for $2 to $3. Here's the guys you should be looking for in that range as well. So please do consider supporting the site and doing that. But at minimum, definitely use Jackson's free auction tool. It is the best in the game. And again, it is free. Maybe one of these days we'll put it behind a paywall, but I just love that everyone, it gets the best feedback. Like everybody loves it that uses it. I have so many friends that have told me how helpful it's been for their auction. So cannot emphasize using those resources and potentially considering supporting your boys with that draft. All righty.
Well, I got to run before questions, but I love doing these pods with you guys, and I'll report back to you on how the auction goes.
Yeah, text me. I don't know that I'll be right at my phone as it's happening, but if I am, I'll write back to you and see how it's going. Either way, send me that roster. I can't wait to see how it comes out.
All right. See you, Wolf. See you, Jackson.
Best of luck, man.
Yeah, good luck.
All righty. Me and Jackson will mow through your questions. So let us know what we can do for you. Thanks again, Truth, as always. Great chatting with you. Chris, what's up? What's good, Wolf? What's good, Chris? Great to see you. Brett Jones, Wolf. What's going on, man? Good to see you. How concerned, I'm guessing is what this meant, Chris, should I be about Cooper Kupp? I think it's a great, very timely question that I haven't weighed a ton on, but I saw that you got to be alluding to the hamstring and that flaring up. And honestly, I'm starting to get a little bit more concerned. He was definitely a guy I loved and had been targeting in best ball very early, pick 3, 4, loved Cooper Kupp back-to-back years of being the wide receiver 1. And now that the hammy's flaring up again, they say it's day-to-day. Keenan Allen, I remember the time he was day-to-day last year, and then we didn't see him for 8 weeks. So to me, I'm dropping Kupp to the bottom of round 1, maybe even mid-round 2. Certainly Tyreek Hill, who I should have been going over him clearly this whole time, gets a bump up. Kelsey, Pollard, would rather have him. I'm a little bit concerned, Chris. If he's back and ready and good to go, of course, there's pretty much no one better. But I'm concerned. What about you, Jackson? How are you feeling about this Cooper Kupp situation?
So, yeah, I just saw the alert that he had a setback or something. I'm not really sure how serious it is. Like, there's a bunch of guys on Twitter that are like doctors and physical therapists that I usually just follow their opinions because I don't know anything about hamstring strains. But yeah, I think you have to be a little bit worried about it if he's having a setback this close to the season. But I think the range that you said seems reasonable just off the top of my head, but I would just look to see what people smarter than me think.
Yeah. I'd like to see the research from the doctors too. My unprofessional non-doctor opinion is over 30-year-old guy is not 38, 30-year-old guy is having these flare-ups, and hamstrings just tend to linger, especially the older and older they get. So when you're the reward with Kupp can be truly game-changing. We saw it 2 years ago. So you can only let him go so far, but it just gets really tough to stomach the risk when you have such great talent from top to bottom with the top, even 18 players, in my opinion. There's a case for the top 18 to go in the top 5. So I have a hard time sliding him in anywhere inside my top 12. He's probably going to fall to about 13, 14 for me, given that the reward could be so high. But the risk right now, I don't know. It just, my gut is just feeling like this is something that's going to linger. Nothing more than that. Juan Pena, if I have the top third pick, who should I pick up first? I mean, for me, it's very clearly Jefferson, Chase, or CMC, whichever one falls to you. I think those 3 guys are the clear top 3 for me. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, you can't really go wrong with that list. I think you could consider Kelsey or Eckler there too. But yeah, I mean, I don't have any issues with that top 3.
I think this again where your league setting is important. If it's a 3-receiver league, that maybe Tyreek Hill gets slid in after the top 2. It's a 3 wide receiver PPR. If it's a 10-man half PPR, only 2 receivers, where it's hard to find those edges. Yeah, Kelsey at 3 absolutely makes sense. Where you're going to get better wide receivers late. But yes, I think those are other worthy names of your top 3 consideration. But in most cases, Chase, Jefferson, or CMC, whichever one falls to me, Juan. Word of the Wolfpack family 2023. Great to see you, Jeff Lee, one of the best fans in the game. Eckler or Nick Chubb worth picking over Jamar Chase or any other receiver besides Jefferson? So if you're talking about that third pick, Juan, I wouldn't take Eckler or Chubb over CMC. And I wouldn't take Eckler or Chubb over Chase or Jefferson. But if you're just saying in general, no, I don't think so. The only time this would be the case is if it's a 2-receiver, 10-team league and you're confident that the wide receivers that will fall to you. An example for me at the 8th pick in my college league, 2-receiver league, I took Kelsey first, Henry in the second, and then Josh Allen in the third. So I didn't take a receiver because I knew that the depth would be pretty good later, and I was rewarded. I got Debo, TJ Moore, Mike Evans. I think I got Elijah Moore, Christian Watson. So I got like those 5 receivers on a team where I didn't take a receiver until after the first 3 picks. So you got to know, again, Juan, it would be helpful to know if it's a 2-receiver versus 3-receiver versus how many flexes. I don't see many situations, though, where I would take – and I love Eckler. I'm as big of an Eckler fan as there is. So not Nick Chubb, definitely not. I'm going to cross him out of the conversation. Would you ever consider Eckler over Chase and Justin Jefferson, or what do you think about that?
I mean, it just depends on the league settings. I think in regular leagues, no. I'm probably taking Jefferson and Chase, and definitely not Chubb unless it's like standard maybe, or there's some sort of like significant point per carry. But no, in regular leagues, I completely agree with everything you just said.
Perfect. Jeff Lee, here's your Wolf team. Kelsey, Hurts, Ridley. This is a good team. Pierce, Madison, Herbert, Pickens, with Richardson, Addison, Warren, Flowers, Chandler, Dubs, Wandale in the IR. Jeff, I think it's a real solid team. It feels a little weak at wider. I mean, I like Pickens a lot. So if you're starting 2 receivers, I'm okay with it. Part of me wonders, like Herbert feels like a little bit of a reach if that's the order you went exactly in. Just because we don't know how involved Roschon or Foreman might be, and we know Fields is going to be vulturing. But other than that, I mean, especially given that you have these nice rookies on the bench, a late bloomer like Warren on the bench, I like a lot of the stabs you took there. I think it's a solid team. I'd give that a pretty firm 84, something of that nature, Jeff. Any complaints or assessment of Jeff's team?
Yeah, it would have been nice to have like a receiver instead of one of Pierce, Madison, or Herbert, I think.
Yeah.
But I think like the structure of the team outside of that seems pretty good. Like I like the quarterbacks, obviously. If Richardson actually hits, I would consider trading Hurts probably because he would probably be a lot easier to move and could potentially give you similar impact, but that's like an issue for down the line. So yeah, I think it's a decent team.
So Juan asking, would you draft Bijan early? I mean, absolutely. Bijan's a generational talent coming into a very efficient run game, very run-heavy offense as well. The thing is it depends on how early you're talking. So I actually have Bijan lower than the consensus. I've seen him go above Eckler, which I think is insane. I personally prefer Pollard, who goes 4 to 5 picks after Bijan. So myself, no, I actually don't end up drafting Bijan early because there's just other guys I like. In a vacuum, I mean, yes, I like Bijan Robinson. If you feel really strongly, go for it. But I think Algier is going to be a little bit more involved than people expect or want. We've seen Arthur Smith misuse his elite talents before. So when I'm splitting hairs between the other first rounders and particularly the other first round running backs, I don't end up with Bijan a lot myself, but I know many smart people do. So it's not a bad pick, Juan, if you're all in. What's your opinion on Bijan?
Yeah, I like Bijan for sure. I feel like he has a higher ceiling than someone like Chubb, who's going like basically right next to each other just because of the receiving upside. Chubb's been like talked about as going to catch a lot of passes this year, but Watson doesn't really throw to the running back, and Chubb has also never caught passes, even when Hunt was injured. Like he did a little bit, but it still never got above like 3 targets per game. So I would take Bijan over him, and I would say I'm like generally bullish on Bijan.
A little bit of a differing opinion with us, but I mean, you can't go wrong with a talent like that in a run-heavy offense. I go Pollard over him every time, and most people don't, so that's why I don't end up with a lot of it. What's up, David Campanelli? Got laptop pre-draft reading the guide in college football. Hey, it is football season, baby. I love when it gets a little cooler in the air. The fall is here. It's back to school for me, which sucks, but then that means that right around the corner is football. So, and back to school doesn't suck. I love my job. I shouldn't say that. Cameron White, take my 10 team. Fields, Breece Hall, Rashad White, Tyreek, Jalen Waddle, Njoku, Olave, DJ Moore. Very deep receivers. I'd like to see better running back depth on a 10-teamer. Like Breece, I love, but might be a slow starter. White, I believe in, but to me, the running back depth is a concern despite how good those receivers are. It reminds me of the law of diminishing returns that Hayden Winks often talks about. Like, yes, receivers are important, but eventually the more you invest in the position, the less gain you're getting. And you can only start so many of these guys. So unless it's like a 6 flex type of league, which it could be, and you can get all of Olave, DJ Moore, Tyreek, Waddle, all those guys into your lineup all at once, then maybe I'd feel different. D-Hop, Deontay, these like great receivers, but eventually they just aren't bringing value. And I think your running backs could start to get dominated by other teams that might have balanced the resources a little bit better. How do you feel about that, Jackson?
Yeah, I'm almost wondering if this is like a keeper or like dynasty or something, because I don't know how you're getting that many good receivers in full PPR, which is great. But yeah, obviously, if you could like balance it out a little bit, unless like the Wolf said, you can start all those guys. Like for week 1, you're going to be hurting at running back if Breece Hall doesn't play, or even if he does play, but he's the backup. So I would, try to flip one of those receivers for a running back if I could.
Awesome assessment. What's good? Itty bitty South City. Great to see you again. I feel like this might be the first time I've seen you on a stream. I'm glad you're back though. So 14 teamer, 4 spot of 14. You got Chase at 4. I love those receivers. Honestly, Najee Akers isn't they're unsexy, but that's production at your running back position, no doubt. I think I'm reading down that list for a 14 teamer. Breece Hall's in there too. Jeez. I don't know who you drafted against, but that's among the best wide receiver and running back cores that I think you could ever expect for a 14-teamer. I think you did really solid, itty-bitty South City. You punted tight end, so obviously we say thoughts on upgrade. That's the position you could get better at, but I think the cost that it took you to punt at tight end, you made up for way more at those wide receivers and running backs you got. And Gino's a solid quarterback too, so I think you did a phenomenal job. What about you?
Yeah, I really like this team for a 14 team. I feel like this is probably the best team that we've seen today, just given the league settings, because it's really deep and you seem to have reliable options at every position besides tight end. And you never know, Dulcich could be good this year still. So I like it.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, this I think is comparable to the 10-teamer we got sent, and it's a 14-teamer. This might be the best roster, honestly, we've gotten yet, and it's the deepest league. So itty bitty, I think that's phenomenal. Fix the problem exactly. Although there's just more inflation there, Brett Jones. It would be nice if only I got 250 and everyone else had 200. That would fix the problem for sure. Sutton, yeah. No more about Sutton. We don't need to talk about him anymore. Although I actually kind of like Courtland Sutton this year with Judy hurt, playing the big Mike Thomas X role with Sean Payton. I actually kind of like Courtland Sutton, especially with everybody having a bad taste, going in round 9, going for $3 in an auction. I like Sutton myself, but I talk myself into him every year, it seems. Realistic projections for Drake London. So, you could buy the guide and get my actual projections for him, Brett Jones, but off the top of my head, I remember that him and Desmond Ridder had a really nice connection, almost a 30% target share. Pitts was also out for a decent amount of that too. So I think I had him going for around a 26% target share, which is obviously a healthy number. But then the overall pass attempts for the offense were pretty low, among the lowest in the league. So I had him coming out pretty good because he is just getting so much of the pie. It's just such a small pie that it wasn't blowing anything out of the water. And it has me a little bit lower on London. I think I had him going for around 1,000 and 950 to 1,000, 6 to 7 touchdowns on 80 catches. So it was solid, but honestly, around some of the other guys he's going, I had them projected higher. What's your thoughts on Drake London?
Yeah, I'll defer to you because I haven't done specific projections, but I do think London could be a decent target because he's kind of priced knowing that the Falcons aren't going to pass the ball really at all like they did last year. And there's at least some chance that they could be closer to the average. Like maybe Desmond Ritter's good. I don't think he is, but there's definitely an outcome that he is really good, and then they pass the ball a lot more, and we know he's going to get a massive target share. So I think he does have some upside, even though like the base case might be a little bit below a lot of other guys that are going around him, like you said.
I'll only disagree in the sense that I don't see any outcome where Desmond Ritter's very good. If he's okay, then yeah, even then
Right.
London will be pretty solid. But Ritter's never going to be. I mean, maybe he's going to stun me. I don't know, but I don't see a world where I think he's okay at best.
I don't think he's going to be great either, but I think there's like at least a scenario where he could average close to league average in pass attempts, especially if they're losing more games than you would expect. So
yeah, and in that case, even if Ritter's not that great, if the volume's just better, then he could blow that projection. So I get what you're saying, absolutely. And last question: do I trade for Kyle Ellis, a second-round pick, and D-Mont for Chubb? So this is keeper league PPR. Had JT go down. I think I can win it all with this trade, though. So I'm all for it. If there's a trade that you think is truly going to get you over the edge, I'm all for it. And honestly, especially if this is like a true dynasty league and it's like a second-round rookie draft pick, I would do this if this is going to get you over the edge, because D-Mont, I don't see a lot of long tail, rapid pick, but I like this trade for you, especially anytime you think a trade could truly get you to the edge. If you're not sacrificing the entire farm, and a second-round pick in D-Mont, to me, is definitely not sacrificing the farm, I would go for this. What about you, Jackson?
I would definitely do it if it was like a second-round rookie pick in Montgomery, but I think it's like a second-round draft pick, like keeper depleted. So I think it's like kind of impossible to answer that question without knowing more context of like who's going to be available. Because like if there was no keepers, would I trade a second round in Montgomery for Chubb? Probably not. But like if it's heavily depleted, then maybe. It just depends like how depleted it is, I guess.
Yeah, I think because I was picturing like a second round rookie pick. If this is like a second round pick and only one person or two people are getting kept, then I might not do that. But yeah, I think that's a really good point. It kind of takes a little bit more. So Wes says, have time for an auction draft wrap reaction. Wes, you're always a supporter of the show. You've probably already bought the draft guide. And if you haven't, I know you eventually will, because you always do. So I always have time for people that are willing to support us like that. I'm pulling it up right here on my phone. So St. Brown 50, a little expensive, but I don't mind it. Smith 37, Gibbs, Stevenson, White. Can you tell me, did you say, 12 man, half PPR, got caught chasing Devonta? I don't think that's a horrible one. Sutton went really cheap. Waller for 11. I love Herbert at 14. I think you assessed it pretty right yourself. So this is the final roster. I'll just read it to you so we don't need to like evaluate prices at all. Herbert, Gibbs, Stevenson, Smith, St. Brown, Waller, Rashad White, Cowboys, Jake Elliott, with Sutton, Schultz, Cooks, Pickett, Bigsby, and Harris on the bench. I mean, in a 12-teamer, I look at that. I think that's a solid, very solid team, like a B+ probably. Without like, because after the fact, you don't want to even look at the prices. You just look at the final composition. I'm not super high on Stevenson, so that's the only kind of issue I have. Is if I was paying that $25, there's probably a running back I'd rather have. But other people are very bullish on Stevenson, even with Zeke there, so I can see that. I think it's a nice solid like 86. Wes, I don't know. Do you want me to read it to you one more time, Jackson?
Sure.
Herbert, Gibbs, Stevenson, Devonta Smith, St. Brown, Waller, Rashad White at flex, and then on the bench, who cares about the defense kicker? On bench is Sutton, Schultz, Cooks, Pickett, Bigsby, and Damian Harris.
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally you'd like to see a better top player, because is St. Brown the best player there?
Pretty much, yeah. St. Brown was the heaviest player.
Okay. I mean, I like St. Brown a lot. I think ideally I would like to see like a couple of top players, like maybe St. Brown and another top player, and like get rid of a couple of the middle tier guys, like you were saying. Yeah, I don't think it's awful.
I think that's a good point too. Yeah, because if he paid down, it's like St. Brown and then like a $12 receiver instead of Smith. Let's call it Ayuk, and then Stevenson becomes a true RB1 at that sense. I'd love that team. I think it's a really good point. Yeah, like I think this is kind of that middling pack team that like it's good, it's solid depth, and probably will get you a decent like this feels like a B fifth to fourth place team, not like a true I'm getting over the hump. I think top to bottom it's solid, but yeah, like paying down at receiver instead of Devonta Smith and then upgrading that running back to like a Pollard or something like that, then this team would have been, an A. It has really good bones, Wes, but I think you are missing that like one last stud. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Last question for Juan Pena Jr. Who do you guys say is a sleeper backup running back like a Jamal Williams? I mean, I don't love Jamal Williams. He's playing 3 games and then your rental's over, in my opinion. Check the draft guide one. I know you're always here. Buy the draft guide. We have a million of them. Not million, but we have all our favorite sleepers. I'm going to toss out Rashad Penny as like one that he made the team. They cut Trey Sermon. There's a lot of like his price really got driven down by the fact that the Eagles were way higher on Gainwell. But like that same reporter was also saying Jalen Hurts wasn't looking great and wasn't completing enough passes in camp last year. So I'm not overreacting to what Elliott Smith-Park said about Gainwell being the clear-cut guy. Like I think Penny is a much better runner, and with those holes, it won't take long for him. Obviously, health's the big risk there, but while he's healthy, I mean, we've seen him blow up for 30-plus points in a much worse situation. So for like a guy that could just go absolutely bananas late, I think Rashad Penny's a great target. Any sleeper running backs you like?
I mean, he's not going to like take over the job. I like Tank Bigsby a lot just because I think if ETN does get injured, then Bigsby has a chance to become like a bell cow. And that offense is just so good that if it does happen, then I think that could be a potential league winner.
Yeah, handcuff with benefits, we like to call it. That's like kind of the type you want to look at late. Is Bigsby could potentially get tossed in your flex based on his preseason usage and a bye week pinch. But if something happens, you're looking at a top 12 running back. I think that's a really good one. All right, we're going to wrap up. I got to give my man Campanelli. What are your feelings on Kamara? 3-game suspension was less than I expected. A lot of reports that he's looking far better than he was last year ever in camp. And I love Nick Underhill. He kind of tells it how it is. There's some beats that seem to pander to likes and wanting to get the retweets. He's not one of them. So when he says that like Kamara is looking like the Kamara of 5 years ago and he completely adjusted his workout and is just zipping on the field like we've never, haven't seen in a few years, I buy that. And Scott Barrett had a great tweet about how Kamara is either the best, most efficient player in the league, like +5 points over expectation, or he's been hurt. And there's not really any in between. So healthy, as in best shape of his career type of situation here. Who knows if that buzz is real or not, but I trust Underhill. I really like his opinion. So that 3-game suspension is driving him down to around 8-9 right now. I think he's a nice price, Campanelli. I like Kamara. Do you like Kamara?
Yeah, for sure. I think he's like a total smash at that price. I think drafting suspended guys in general is usually a great strategy because people overvalue like the 3 weeks that you're not going to have him at the beginning that ultimately matter a lot less than the playoff weeks where he'll hopefully be there and producing. So yeah, I like Kamara a lot.
Yeah, love it. And Juan, with the last question, do you guys trust Ayuk? Yeah, I absolutely do. I do not feel like he'll be a bust. It is a tight target. There's Debo, there's Kittle, there's CMC. So there could be ups and downs, but all reports are Ayuk has somehow taken his game to the next level. I already like the player a lot. So if there's an even better Ayuk out there, who was apparently like dominating the target share, looking phenomenal throughout camp, looked great in his preseason action, it's going to be a little up and down with so many mouths to feed there in San Fran, but I do not think Ayuk's a bust. I absolutely love the player. And if he can somehow take another step forward, all the better. Even if he doesn't, I think he's a pretty good bet at his price. What about you?
Yeah, I don't think he's a bust either. I think maybe he has a little bit limited upside just because there's so many targets there, but I don't necessarily have like a super strong opinion like above or below market on him. I'd say I'm pretty much right there.
Yeah, I'd say the only guy, like I see sometimes Christian Watson on Yahoo in different leagues, fall to the same range. And to me, he has the upside to emerge as like a dominant true alpha. We know Ayuk's ceiling's probably capped. So I often will go Watson over Ayuk or something of that nature. He's not going to bust though. I think he's got a great floor. Even if his ceiling's a little capped towards some guys that might be true target hogs in his range, I don't think you can go wrong with Brandon Ayuk. I have him pretty high on the big board. Alrighty, Wolfpack. Well, thank you again so much. I hope this has helped you get ready for your auction drafts. Do check out rotostreetjournal.com for Jackson's incredible auction tools series in general. It could not be more helpful. The writing's phenomenal. The targets, the strategy, it's so great. So I appreciate you coming on, Jackson, and kind of talking through it, showing how the tool works for everybody out there. I could not recommend it higher. And one last time, that guide is now up. So if you guys do want to support the guys who are here answering your questions all the time, it would mean the world. It does help us. You guys helped us launch a new homepage last year with your support. So please do consider buying that guide, supporting your guys here at Roto Street Journal. It would mean the world. So in a world of fantasy sheep, guys, be the wolf. Later.